Can you hear me and see me okay? Great. Well, hello everyone. I'm Kathy Tenbrook. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Interagency Council on Homelessness. I'll let my partners introduce themselves when they speak as well. And for those of you who are less familiar, the Interagency Council on Homelessness is a cabinet level body that is led by our Lieutenant Governor, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. It is co-chaired by Commissioner Ho at Minnesota Housing and Commissioner Harpstead at the Department of Human Services. And it has 14 different state agencies represented by their commissioners. And then that is the group that really works together across agencies and across both homeless specific and mainstream resources to try to do everything we can to prevent and end homelessness in Minnesota, with the vision ultimately of creating housing stability for every one of us in this state. I want to echo Commissioner Ho's gratitude. I know that many people on this call right now and in this webinar have been really working around the clock since March. This marathon has been just like nothing any of us have ever experienced before. And now, as you heard the governor say last night, if you were able to tune in to his remarks, you know, the ground is shifting under our feet even more. This has become the most challenging moment so far in this pandemic. And we just want to express how with you we are. We are with you every minute, every day. We are working tirelessly with you to help protect people all across the state from COVID. And no matter what role you're playing in this work, whether you're a funder or an advocate or a provider or somebody with lived experience of homelessness that is bringing your expertise to us and teaching us constantly about what needs to change and what needs to be done, just grateful to all of you for the work that you do every day. So we've learned a lot since March. 2020 has been an incredible year of both challenge and, you know, I think the way our Lieutenant Governor talks about it, I think is really powerful. You know, she says, we want to take everything we have been learning this year and we are not going to go back to normal because normal was not good enough. Normal meant that too many Minnesotans were without a safe place to live. Normal meant that the disparities among who experiences homelessness were just off the charts and unacceptable. And so we're trying to take all of this, even in these challenging times, even facing, you know, the fiscal challenges that are ahead for all of us, and do better by people experiencing homelessness in our state. So next slide, Elizabeth. So really quickly, I just want to provide a little bit of a summary of our COVID response to date. So, you know, in March, when the pandemic hit, we were really grateful that DHS and the legislature worked together and were able to advance about $26.5 million in our emergency services program very quickly to get that out to providers all across the state. That was coupled with some additional federal funds to support people experiencing homelessness. So the $75 million in new state and federal funds was the largest increase in homeless specific funding in state history. And it all happened really quickly, really early in the pandemic. Those funds have been getting out to providers, as many of you know well, on a 2-week rolling basis ever since. And have stood up over 2,300 hotel rooms and safe spaces across the state, along with staffing support and hours of shelters and outreach support and food and PPE and all of that. And all of you have been just remarkable in helping to utilize those resources as quickly as you can to protect people. In addition, about $106 million in federal funds through the CARES Act have been allocated to prevent evictions and homelessness, about $6 million for veterans and $100 million in the COVID housing assistance program that is run by Minnesota Housing to prevent evictions. We have in Minnesota one of the most comprehensive eviction moratoriums in the nation, and it is tied to the governor's emergency powers. So it is not set to expire at the end of the year like the federal eviction moratorium, but will continue as long as the governor's emergency powers continue as well. So we're grateful, but there are many people, as you know, hurting and on the edge of homelessness because of this pandemic, because of lost jobs, and this COVID housing assistance program has been rolling out to help folks in every corner of the state. Our public health team You know, I think if there's one thing, and you'll hear Eric talk about this in a moment, one thing that has been so striking during this pandemic is the recognition, maybe finally, by so many people across the state that homelessness is a public health crisis. It always has been a public health crisis, but when you have homelessness combined with a pandemic, that becomes even more clear. Our public health team has been unbelievable in the way they have stepped into this role, and we now have a homeless specific public health team at MDH that works really around the clock to make sure that every shelter and every provider in the state working with people experiencing homelessness has the guidance they need, the resources they need, the supports they need to really protect people as best we can. We know we're entering a particularly challenging moment where cases are starting to go up. The protection you have provided has really meant that most infection rates for, our infection rates overall for people experiencing homelessness have stayed generally very low. Certainly far below what we predicted would be happening when this pandemic began. So that is just a huge testament to all of you and providers in your communities that have done that work. But we are seeing more and more outbreaks. It is becoming, because of the community spread, a lot harder for those providers to do the work they need to do. So we are all regrouping and figuring out every possible tool we have in our toolbox to do even more to protect people right now. We've had really creativity and innovation has been a key part of the response here. And I'm really grateful to both providers and our partners at the Department of Human Services that have been doing this relatively new hotel to home model to try to bring people from outside into hotel spaces, safe spaces, and then use the state's housing support program to move people into permanent housing whenever possible from those locations. Those were enormously critical during the days around the murder of George Floyd and the emergency evacuations to protect people here in the metro. But they have been used across, since March in many locations as well. We have weekly webinars, which many of you I think know, but maybe not everybody. Every Wednesday, we meet with stakeholders across the state to make sure they have the latest information from us and to answer questions. So all of you are welcome to attend those weekly webinars, and we'll have information on how you can get connected there. And then finally, we just, our team meets every day. We're talking across all of our agencies, working together. So if there's ever anything folks want to bring to us that needs to be, that we need to hear from you out in the communities, wherever you are and the experience you're having, please do share that with us. And it's something that we will work through together across agencies. Next slide, please. I think the other thing, in addition to homelessness, is a public health crisis that we've all known for a very long time, but has become once again even more clear during the pandemic, is that homelessness shows just the profound impacts of racism and the structural inequities in our systems. And this graph, recently updated with the most recent data that we have, is just always been so striking to me, and it becomes even more striking, unfortunately. So if you look at this graph on your screen, on the far left, you can see that that's the beginning of this story. If all populations are at 1, but then if you look over to see, if you compare white, Asian Pacific Islander, Black, American Indian, Hispanic, for those who are in poverty, you can start to see that by factors of 4 and 2, the disparity is starting to grow, meaning that some of those, especially that top line, American Indians, are 4 times more likely to be in poverty. So you can start to see that disparity even among people in poverty. But what's so striking about this graph to me is if you go to the next category, people experiencing homelessness, the disparity shoots up. So even compared to people in poverty, the disparity among people who actually end up experiencing homelessness is just so dramatic. We can see from this that American Indians are 27 times more likely to be experiencing homelessness. Black Minnesotans, 15 times more likely to be experiencing homelessness. And then the final part is you can see who is most likely to be unsheltered. And those disparities are huge and even greater, once again, for the American Indian population. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric and let him introduce himself and share with you some of our key takeaways from 2020.
There we go. Needed to get unmuted. Thanks, Kathy. I'm Eric Rumdahl. I'm Deputy Director of the Interagency Council on Homelessness, and just appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. I think what we're really hoping to do is to share how at the state level we've tried to distill and capture what Kathy has described in terms of this incredible moment of challenge for our community and for people experiencing homelessness and for the response to homelessness in a way that really points us forward to what pieces of this really need to go into that solution that the Lieutenant Governor described as not going back to normal, but really creating something better. And so I think one of the most profound and I hope lasting impacts of the pandemic has been really this shift in the way in which the health and public health impacts of homelessness are really understood at an entirely different level and with a different level of engagement among partners than has existed before. I think that's also, we also have seen that in the kind of emergency management sphere as well, that really in the context of the public health crisis, the need for a deeply public health informed response to homelessness in a way that has been brought in partners, healthcare partners, local public health departments, to collaborate with other elements of the homeless response system in a way that hasn't happened previously. We hope that's something that we can build on going forward. I think the other piece that if you had asked many people who are connected to homelessness whether it was possible for our system to grow and adapt as rapidly as has occurred since March, I think it would have probably strained credibility. I don't know that people would have believed that rapid pace was possible for so much money to roll out, for so much additional program capacity to be stood up, for all the ways in which nonprofits and philanthropy and local governments have done things that they've never done before, all really rapidly. That really does signal something that I know many of us have believed to be true for a long time, which is that if homelessness is a result of a series of policy choices and resource decisions, it can also be the solution can also be the subject of a series of policy choices and resource decisions that let us really move rapidly to solutions. We also know that in this kind of collision of our kind of reckoning with the deep and profound and systemic impact of racism and the public health crisis of the COVID pandemic, that in a way that we've said for many years, but feels even more evident and essential right now, the need to center equity in the response to homelessness and really think about the ways in which the homeless response system is about shifting power and resources to communities that have been historically and currently disenfranchised by racist and inequitable policies and practices. And so kind of carrying that lesson forward into what we do next and how we sustain the work on preventing and ending homelessness. It's also really evident that that with the amount of resources that have gone into our homeless response system and still not met all of the needs, the fact that we need to actually have this system resourced in an appropriate way at an appropriate scale, I think we've answered a lot of questions that people might have had about what is how much more investment is really even necessary in some of these systems. I think we've demonstrated over the last 8 months that there's been just a remarkable unmet need for additional resources. And I hope that lesson helps inform the work that we do going forward. And finally, in terms of the lessons that we've captured here, really just recognizing that we talk about a homeless response system as though that is something that exists. And often what ends up happening is that we have, in fact, lots of interacting, overlapping systems and programs and responses that aren't really fully knit together as a system in the way that ultimately would be even more effective. And that contrast is really evident when you look at other systems that have also been activated and scaled up in the context of the pandemic response, where there are clear lines of accountability and responsibility that has allowed those systems to move often more quickly than we've been able to do in the homelessness space. And so we hope that this is at least a first pass at trying to capture some of those important lessons, and are looking forward to getting your thoughts in just a couple of minutes. So Kathy, back to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Eric. So as we think about all that we have learned, and we think of the next steps that we want to take together all across the state in partnership with everyone, with all our partners, we know that this year, 2020, was going to be the year that we were spending our time doing a lot of community engagement and planning together about what would show up in our next iteration of our statewide plan to prevent and end homelessness, the Heading Home Together plan. Well, of course, because of COVID, all of our attention collectively turned to crisis response and crisis mode and the work that we have been doing. And so we haven't had a chance to do that level of work yet. So we will not release our next Heading Home Together plan yet, of course, because we want to work with our communities all across the state to make sure that what we do next together is informed by all of you and all of the work that you're doing, and most importantly, informed by people who are closest to the issue and are experiencing housing instability and homelessness. So we're in the process of beginning that next iteration of our plan, even in the midst of this really difficult moment. And kind of building on some of what Eric just said, based on what we learned, our commitment in this next plan is to really emphasize very clearly and honestly and unapologetically the need for resources, investment, and commitment from the public sector as really critical to solving our issues together. And as Eric mentioned, we have a much better story to tell in terms of how we know what that level of need truly is. We want to bring an equity focus to the efforts and be very explicit about the ways that homelessness is a product of racism, and so in turn what we need to be doing to center equity and unpack that racism in all that we are doing in this plan. Center the expertise of people closest to this issue, people with lived experience who know exactly how our collective response has failed them and who we believe are best situated to really help us improve our systems, and how we do a really intentional process to consult people, both with lived experience, but also providers and everyone in the local communities, philanthropy, and the public as well. So we really want to develop a plan for that kind of community input and engagement and focus. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time right now getting some of that, a little bit of input from you as best we can on this webinar, but then also sharing how we will go forward. So Eric, back to you.
Great, thanks, Kathy. So on your screen, you'll see a web address, menti, menti.com, with a code 6287669 that will allow you to actually respond interactively to a set of 3 questions that we have for you to help guide the work going forward to both develop the state's work on preventing and ending homelessness and the larger response to preventing and ending homelessness statewide. And so I'm going to switch now through the magic of Zoom, hoping you can all see the Menti screen now with the first question. And we've got 3 questions that are structured similarly to this one, where we're really asking you to help us identify things that you think are important for us to continue. Please begin such a response with the word continue, and things that you think we could do better as a state. And in this particular question, we're starting off with a question about equity. And so if you don't start with the word continue, we'll assume that it means this is something to do better or improve the way that it's addressed. But if there are also things that you think that should be continued, I think helpful for us to hear that from you as well. And so we're just going to let responses pour in here for a minute, give you a chance to think about what you'd want to share on that question. And you should be able to see those responses popping up on your screen. That's great. Thank you so much. If you haven't joined on Menti yet and are wondering about that code, you can also see it at the top of the screen. So if you haven't joined in, you still can. I'm going to give folks just another couple of seconds. These are really helpful responses. Thank you. And I see lots of common themes here in terms of engagement and funding and kind of building on what we've been able to do together as a state over the last 8 months.
Eric, there's a lot about education, ongoing education of the community as well, which is really interesting.
Yep. And that's maybe a nice a nice segue into the next question that we have for you, which is, let's see if I can get to that one, specifically about community engagement. So if you're in the middle of entering a response on Menti, don't worry, you can still enter it and it'll still get captured on the previous slide. But otherwise it'll say the slide has been updated and you can click a button on your screen to be able to go to the new question. This new question is really around what should we continue or do better in terms of community engagement? And so I think some of the previous responses did already touch on that, but really looking for feedback specifically on community engagement. And on the Menti tool, you may need to click the button that says go to the next question so that you can start to see that next question. There we go. That's great. These are really thoughtful responses.
And Eric, just to put a finer point on it, we will capture, this is not just for right now, but this is something we can keep, right? And take with us when we leave today.
And share with the other members of the council.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, this is also a really good question to segue into the topics Elizabeth is going to cover in just a minute. But before we do that, we also wanted to create just an opening for any other kinds of suggestions people might have. And so again, not specific to the two topics we've already covered, but just really anything else that from your perspective, the state should either continue doing or do better as it pertains to our response to homelessness, really wide open. Well, I just want to say getting this kind of information is so helpful, and I feel like we're hearing so many voices in these comments that it's been hard to transition to doing all these events virtually, but I feel like getting a spirit of what you're all thinking and where you see opportunities and the challenges that might be ones we need to address. Hearing that come through in these comments is really very, very powerful. So I just want to say thank you for that. And I think across these comments, it feels like one of the themes that I'm hearing really consistently is just the ways in which ending homelessness is not about just the homeless response system. It's about every system. It's about every system that kind of touches people who can play a role in creating more housing stability. So I just really appreciate that perspective. Well, thank you for that. We'll have a chance for more just interactive discussion a little later in the session, but this is helpful just for us to do a rapid capture of a lot of great ideas and to have that in a way that we'll be able to take going forward. I'm now really excited to have Elizabeth Dressel talk about some of those community engagement plans and to introduce herself. And Elizabeth, hand it off to you and away we go.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I echo Eric. This is really great to see coming in as we've been starting to have these initial conversations around our plans for engagement, both on the plan and really trying to develop an ongoing structure to engage with all of you, all of our stakeholders and partners. So thanks so much for all of those ideas, and keep them coming. We want to keep hearing from you on all of that. And so as Kathy was mentioning, we are starting to look at the next iteration of our Heading Home Together plan. Both will be developing some structure around engagement specific to that plan, but we're also really having conversations about developing an ongoing structure that we really embed into the way we do our work on how we're continuing to engage with all of you, our partners and stakeholders, as we do this work. So it's not just we come and get our feedback for one plan and then we take it and we go. It's really we're in this work together. We can't do it without one another. And so how do we develop a structure to be in that partnership, in that engagement with all of you. So we've really been thinking about, with COVID, and like Eric's saying, we're doing things differently with virtual, but also really thinking about, and I saw a few comments on this, of meeting communities and people where they are already convening and sharing information and getting regular updates from them and sharing updates with those groups on the work our state team is doing. Realizing that everyone has limited time. And so instead of creating new structures and new places for people to meet and come together, is really thinking about where do we meet you all where you're at. And this will take some partnership of being invited into your spaces and honoring the work you're doing and how you hold those meetings, but really trying to think about how we can come together and join you in that work. Communication and education, I saw a lot of comments coming in about that. that's something we are really thinking about as well in developing a new website. We know that we have not had always the strongest web presence, where we have a few different state agency sites that we have information on, but really trying to develop a place where we can have one central website that actually, with it being more virtual stuff, an interactive platform on top of just being a place where you can go and get information and digest stuff from us, is a place where you can share with us, but also that you could see other people's thoughts and ideas and comment on those. So we are looking at developing that website, and we'll be sharing updates as we kind of move through that process. But that would be another tool as we think about engagement, is also a way to be transparent, where we can put notes and information about what we're hearing from other people, so you can start to see across groups that it's not just like we're holding it and you never get to read it or see it. So that's our hope with the new website. Eric, if you want to move to the next slide for me. Oh, I think our slide, I think maybe my slide, is there a slide on there with the that spectrum we've been looking at from the International Association for Public Participation?
There is, and it has a slash through it, but I have another way to put that up there. So
great.
Hold on. There you go.
Thanks, Eric. So as we've been starting to think about this work, this is a structure that's been created by the International Association for Public Participation. They use the acronym IAP2, you'll see down there in the lower corner. But this is a spectrum for really trying to be clear, both on purpose with ourselves who are, doing this engagement work, but also to all of you, so we can be collectively on the same page about, when and how we're getting information and what our promise is in doing that. And so we are really trying to use this as a tool where it's a spectrum. There's not always where you have to live in one box all the time, or that one box is better than the other, that inform is always better than collaborate, or the other way around. It's really, I think, more, we're using it as a frame as how are we being honest and transparent about what we're asking for, how we're going to use that input. So that, like, if there's something that at the state, there's some things that come with regulations or are built into law that we don't have a lot of control over. And so if we know that we don't have that control, we're going to not try to ask you for your input on changing something that the law is not going to let us change. And so setting realistic expectations, but where there is space to collaborate or empower or involve in more of, as we're developing the plan, that's what we want to build into our work, both on the plan side, but also as we continue to do the actual implementation of the work, which is why we've talked about the importance of, building an ongoing structure for staying in communication and relationship with all of you. All right, Eric. Then I think you can move on to that slide. So we had some other questions here. I know that Eric, some of these are similar to you might have similar thoughts to these questions as you did to the questions Eric previously posed on Menti. Eric, I wondered if they type into Menti, is that still capturing, or otherwise what we were thinking, since this is, I know we're not able to hear your voices, unfortunately, today, but you can also type into the question box your responses to these. But we are just really curious if you have thoughts on how you'd like us to regularly, engage with the council on our work. If there are things you really want us to be thinking about as we develop our plan. It's still in development. It's not we've decided how we're all going to do this work. So we really do want to hear your thoughts, especially if there's things on that spectrum that speak to you. And if you have ideas on who we should be regularly meeting with and engaging with. So you can put that into the question box if you want to share that with us. These are also questions that were open for feedback. Kathy, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to that point, who we should be regularly meeting with. I think we heard a lot about definitely meeting with people with lived experience and including them. I would love if in the chat box or somehow directly to Elizabeth, to her email or something, if you have really specific meetings, places, ideas, ways we should do that, we'd love to get as specific as possible so we can really start to implement that.
I see someone put in here having a monthly email newsletter is a good way to get information out. So I appreciate that. I'm going to briefly, shortly here, talk about our current newsletter process that we have. So appreciate that. But yeah, as Kathy said, if there's anything as specific as you can get for us, that's really helpful in our planning and hearing from all of you. So feel free to keep populating into the question box with those ideas. I also will put here in the chat my email if you don't have it already, and always available to hear from all of you that way. Local heading home meetings is another idea. The weekly provider webinar has been a very helpful way to engage with folks. Can the council have representatives attend the COC meetings across the state to receive input and comments regularly? I know that that's something that has been explored, Eric, and I am new to the council's work. I started just back in March, so I'm still learning some of this, but I know that I appreciate that feedback. I think there has been past experience trying to do some of that structure. Consult with direct service workers with the homeless population that work day to day with the population and hear the needs and struggles regularly. These are all really great ideas and comments. We appreciate them. I'm going to hold for maybe one more minute if there's other things that are coming to your mind about how and who and in ways you want to engage with the council. Well, thank you for all of the feedback thus far, and we are here to hear more, so continue to reach out to us. Eric, if you want to go to the next slide, I can start talking a little bit about some of these things we've alluded to if people want to get more engaged. So we have been using the Heading Home Alliance COVID-19 page throughout this response as kind of the best place to direct folks to get updates and relevant information. Right now, it's very specific to the COVID-19 response. So, you know, all the public health guidance that the team has been putting out from the Department of Public Health. This has information about all the funding opportunities where people can apply for that. It has just other resources, lots and lots of resources that you all have shared, different providers have shared with folks. We are doing a weekly provider webinar, like Kathy mentioned, that happens every Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. If you go to this website and scroll down towards the bottom, there is a link for how you can register for that. And if you have any trouble registering, you can reach out to me, but encourage you, if you are interested, to join us for those calls. And that's also a really great space if you have questions as it relates to your COVID-19 response or other things. We really have enjoyed having this weekly time with the provider community and other stakeholders to hear how it's going, what you're dealing with, what your struggles are, sharing ideas and things like that. And then the next slide, Eric. Is this weekly newsletter is something we started at the beginning of COVID that has been another tool for us to share information out to folks. Right now, it's been mostly specific to the COVID-19 response and resources and information that we want to make sure everyone has in real time. So if you haven't signed up for that and you are interested in doing that, you can go to the Minnesota Housing webpage and click on the e-news in the lower right-hand corner, or click on this link on your slide. Select the topics and issues for providers serving people experiencing homelessness. So encourage you and your colleagues to do that. Those usually get sent out every Tuesday is kind of our typical cadence, but sometimes you'll see a few come at different times during the week, but it's been a tool to get resources out. So heard a few comments that these things have been helpful, and also ways that we hope to kind of continue beyond COVID, doing more regular communication and using some of these tools to help, like you said, educate and get more information out there into the public. I think that is all of our slides. I do want to, if there's any questions we can answer, we are open to answering those as well. I did see a question in here that was asking about homeless workers that are at high risk of COVID and if they can look at hazard pay. And if you are with an organization just wanting to plug the emergency services COVID resources that organizations can apply, that is an eligible expense to provide hazard pay. So there are some state and federal resources available for shelters and outreach teams to provide hazard pay to their employees. All right, Kathy, I'll turn it over to you to close us out. Thanks.
Just a very quick thank you before we turn it back over to Rhonda. I thought this was really helpful. You know, of course, in person is always better. I would love to see your faces. I would love to hear your voices. But thank you for sharing all that you did share. And I promise you, we take all of that stuff to heart in all that we do. I'm really looking forward to the way we are looking to try to engage even more with all of you in the coming year. I think this virtual challenge has certainly been a challenge, but I also think, to be really honest, especially for our partners in Greater Minnesota, it has given us a portal to more communication with people all across the state on a much more regular basis than we were achieving before. And so that's another thing that I don't want to see lost as we move past the pandemic eventually. I really want to keep that going. And so your ideas around keeping the weekly webinars and the newsletters and these kinds of ways for us to engage in your communities in already existing meetings, those are the kinds of things that I'm really looking forward to in the coming months. So thanks, everybody. Really appreciate you taking the time, even during this really, really intense and busy moment. And thanks, Rhonda. Thanks for what you're doing. And thanks for inviting us here today.
Well, thanks to all of you for presenting and gathering, providing an opportunity for everybody to provide input. I love this tool, Mentimeter. I definitely see us using this in the future. So we're always learning new things in this new virtual environment. So I just wanted to give a quick preview of our sessions tomorrow. At 9 o'clock, we have housing support and MSA housing assistance overview with folks from the Department of Human Services. And then at 11 o'clock will be our 10th and final session of our virtual learning series. And it is on bonding. Go big so everybody can go home. Thank you all again for attending, and for those of you participating in Give to the Max Day. I hope you're having a great day with that campaign. Thanks to all our presenters and attendees. Have a great day.